All right. Welcome back to another episode of SaaS Buyers Club. I'm your host, Omeed, and I'm a corporate lawyer for SaaS founders. I help SaaS founders in 4 primary areas. I help them start their businesses, scale their businesses, raise venture capital, and exit. So pretty much anything that has to do with contracts is what I help founders with. If you haven't watched the show before, I believe, and it is my mission, to help SaaS founders and founders in general get the best exits possible. And how we do that on SaaS Buyers Club is we interview the world's brightest minds and experts and founders who have found success, people just like Malcolm, who's my guest today, so that we can get valuable insights for SaaS founders. Because I believe that any sort of value that is provided to SaaS founders will help them increase the value of their businesses, which ultimately will result in great exits for them. So with that being said, I'm very pleased to introduce Malcolm Lewis. Welcome, Malcolm.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
For everyone out there, Malcolm is all about nailing your pitch deck, and he has a very fascinating story that predates the internet. So, Malcolm, would love for you to share a little bit about your background and what it is you do now and how you do it.
Yeah, sure. So I actually spent probably, before I got into pitch decks, I probably spent about 30 years in enterprise software. I actually, as you can tell, I'm from the East Coast, all the way back to England. Came out in 92. I was working for Oracle at the time in their UK headquarters, and was lucky enough to get transferred, and was lucky enough to land in Silicon Valley 3 years before Netscape and the internet took off. So ended up being in ground zero, ended up living in Palo Alto. So literally remember walking past a little coffee shop with 5 guys upstairs hanging their little Google banner above the coffee shop. And that was the early days of Google. Anyway, I worked for 2 or 3 startups. I left Oracle and worked for 2 or 3 startups after that, one of which we took public in 99. It was an enterprise software company. We did $1 billion IPO and an $11 billion secondary. And as the marketing guy, I did the investor roadshow pitch decks for both roadshows, for the IPO and the secondary. And aside from obviously spending my entire marketing life creating sales pitches, that was really the first time that I did investor pitch decks. So that was kind of my start there. That company did great, and then it didn't do so great. I ended up leaving and doing 2 or 3 startups on my own. Was able to sell a couple of them, not magical $1 billion exits, but certainly good enough exits that I didn't complain. And I actually retired from full-time operating work maybe 3 years ago, just after COVID. Took that as my hint to maybe consider retirement. Very quickly got bored with full retirement and wanted to do something where I could help founders. I could help the people whose shoes I'd been in for so many years. And I wanted to do something that was very contained, where I could engage, do a 2, 3, 4 week project, be helpful, but then be able to back away and start another project with a different founder, a different interesting story to learn. And so that's how I got into doing the pitch decks. I'd been doing them for myself and the companies that I was working with for many, many years. And I decided this would be a great retirement gig. I can spend a couple of days a week doing this. Each project is a different founder. It's a different business. It's a different startup. So I flex the same muscle every time, but each one is different and interesting because each startup is different and interesting in its own way.
Yeah. So I hear that, pitch decks were important to you. You saw that you had great skill in producing them and developing them and working with them. And also, I would imagine that your position is that they're very important for founders. So why should founders care about pitch deck?
Yeah, and before I answer that question, you mentioned that I had a skill. I developed a skill. And one of the things I say to founders is, don't feel bad that you're struggling with a pitch deck. No founder is born with this innate skill of being able to tell their story in a structure and in a sequence using language that investors are looking for. So I always like to say the reason that you would actually work with a pitch deck coach in the first place is nobody's born swinging like Tiger Woods. Nobody's born being able to create the perfect pitch deck, but it is a skill that you can learn through practice, especially if there's a process and a philosophy behind how you build a pitch deck. I have a process, I have a philosophy, and when I work with clients, that's part of what they get from working with me is they get a great pitch deck, but they also see what the process is and the philosophy behind why we include what we include, as opposed to just this is the template, fill in the blanks, and I'm not going to tell you why this particular template is the one that you need. It's definitely something that's learned over time. That's why second and third time founders typically don't need a pitch deck coach. They've done it. They've figured out through trial and error what works, and they don't need somebody like me. But if you're doing it for the first time, you definitely need some help from somebody somewhere. Now, that was answering the first part of your question. What was the second part again?
The second part is, why should founders care about having a pitch deck?
Yeah, so a pitch deck, I always like to separate pitch and deck. The pitch is the story, it's the narrative, it's the content, it's how you explain your business. And it's not just explaining your business to investors. Initially, you should create a pitch deck to explain the business to yourself and help you create a holistic view of all of the moving parts of this business that you're contemplating. Now, really, if you do a proper, rigorous pitch deck process, particularly if you just start with an outline, which is something we'll talk about later, because I'm very adamant that you should never just start building slides. It's the separation of message and medium. When we break out pitch deck, the pitch is the story. The deck is just slides. It's just the medium, right? But a pitch deck, it's almost like a pyramid. The tip of the pyramid is a 20, 30-second elevator pitch. You know, the second layer of the pyramid might be a 2-minute elevator pitch. The next layer of the pyramid might be, let's take that elevator pitch and let's take the 15, 16 statements within that elevator pitch and we'll give them a dedicated slide. Now we've got a deck. You could take each one of those slides and you could blow that out into 1 or 2 pages in a business plan, right? So the pitch, the description of all the moving parts of your business and why it makes sense and why it's a good idea, why this market is attractive, why this product has the potential to dominate that market and generate growth and potentially a nice exit. That's the pitch. And it can be expressed as simply as 30-second elevator pitch, or it could be a 30-page document. But founders should really go through the process of documenting what it is that they plan to build, right? What is the opportunity you see? What is the unmet need? What is the problem? What is the solution? Why is your solution going to be better than anything that's out there? Plus, why is your solution going to be able to fend off competition from folks with deeper pockets to say, oh, that's a good idea. Maybe we'll go after that opportunity as well, right? You know, how are you going to make money? How big is this market opportunity? How are you going to go to market? All of these things that are typically slides in a pitch deck, they're also sections in a business plan, and they're also elements of the pitch, right? If you were to just stand up in front of investors and they said, all right, 2 minutes, go, you would mentally check off each one of those items and you would talk through, here's what we do, here's who we help, here's how we help them, here's the primary business benefit, here's the number of people that have this problem and therefore the size of the market. Here are all the reasons why this market will continue to grow over time. Here's what current solutions look like. Here's why they suck. Here's an opportunity to build a new type of solution that's our focus. Here's why we've not only built this thing, but we built it in a way that's going to be very difficult for competitors to come, right? It's the pitch. And you need that initially for yourself as a founder, just to clarify your kind of worldview, your holistic view of what it is that you're going to invest your time in for the next 2-3 years. And then once you have that, now you can share the vision, you can share the pitch. And before you share it with investors, you're going to have to get a co-founder. So now you can use it to get co-founders, to get those first key employees, to get advisors who can plug the gaps in the experience that you lack. So for example, if you're a first-time founder, I always advise first-time founders, get somebody on your advisory board who's done exactly what you did. They took a company from zero to exit, and they did it with a product somewhat similar to yours in a space somewhat similar to yours, right? Well, these founders and these key employees, the folks that you really want to hire, if they're as good as you need them to be, they want to hear a very convincing story as to why they should invest their time with you. So you need to pitch for them. right? So before you even get to the point that you need to pitch to investors, you need to get a very clear picture of the business for yourself. And then you need to be able to share that with your co-founder, the first 2 or 3 key members of the founding team, and with advisors, because you can't even get to a point that you're even ready to approach investors until you've done those things. So the pitch deck is literally valuable from the moment you decide that you would like to create a startup.
Interesting. I feel like most founders don't think about pitch decks in that way. I think most, especially like first time founders, typically think of the pitch deck as like a requirement to securing investment.
Right.
So what I hear you saying is actually broadening, the use of the pitch deck, the importance of the pitch deck, why founders should care about pitch decks is, first of all, it clarifies, every aspect of the business that's important to communicate to the outside world, to yourself.
Right.
And so the very practice of putting the pitch deck together makes you understand your own business opportunity to a greater degree of clarity that you can communicate outward. And before you even start thinking about going to investors, it's like, do you have the right advisors? Do you have the right team? Do you have a co-founder? And the pitch deck can really help support in those kind of early, steps that need to be taken before you potentially even start thinking about going to investors. Because if you go to an investor, the investor is going to be like, well, do you have if you're a non-technical co-founder, do you have a technical co-founder, for example?
Exactly.
And that would be addressed by, putting together a pitch deck and going out and, communicating your vision, getting people excited about what it is that you're trying to build so that you find the aligned talent that will help you get to the end goal that you want to get to. Is that right?
Yeah. And actually, you when I talk about a pitch deck, for that founder, I wouldn't necessarily put it into a deck unless you felt that you were going to have to present it for example, to a potential advisor. I always start my pitch decks with an outline. It's literally 15 bullets, right? Each bullet is some aspect of your narrative, right? This is the opportunity. This is the problem with current solutions. This is our solution. These are our enduring competitive advantages, et cetera, et cetera. When I build a pitch deck, we start with that, right? If you could only say 15 things to an investor, to a co-founder, to an advisor, what 15 things would you say to get across what it is that you're doing and why somebody should join you in a way that's clear, concise, and obviously compelling, right? Once you've got those 15 sentences, you can double click on any one of those and say, what are the 2 or 3 bullets that I could add that would either clarify, amplify, or support that statement? And so when I think of a pitch deck, I actually think of that outline, which you can verbalize. Once you've built this, you could stand up and just verbalize this. You shouldn't need the slides at all. The only time you actually need slides is if you can't actually verbalize this pitch, you can't present, then you use a deck to present for you, right? And so you translate the outline into a deck. But when I work with clients, the outline is what we spend most of our time on because that's the pitch. Turning it into deck slides is the easy part, right? There's still some skill in transferring the outline to slides to make sure that nothing gets lost in translation. But the key is really more that outline. And yes, to your point, if you don't understand all of the elements that will make your business successful or all the things that you need to do to make this business successful from the very get-go, then you've really not got any yardstick to make decisions by, right? And that's what a lot of startups do is they just freewheel it and then they only actually start to think rigorously and holistically about the business when they have to present it to investors. And I would argue that's a little bit too late. You may have put 2 or 3 years into something that had you gone through that rigorous, holistic appraisal yourself, you may have decided, you know what, this market actually isn't that big, or this market's big, but there's some very good established players that actually don't have a lot of weaknesses. And it's going to be very difficult for me to break into this market. And you've got to be very rigorous. If you go through this rigorous kind of documentation of the business that you're trying to build, these are some of the things that you have to think about. And you have to be very honest with yourself, right? Is this truly an underserved market? Are there really bad existing solutions that are unlikely to be able to react and create a similar solution when they see mine enter the market? And maybe you need to take a step back and rethink what you're even doing. It's not only a documentation tool, but it's a validation tool. And the first person you need to validate the problem and the solution, the opportunity with is yourself, because you're investing your own time in it. And we've only got, right? Unlike VCs and investors in general, we can't diversify our time. We're all in on one. So I personally, if I was doing a startup, I am actually doing a little one on the side.
Oh,
I'd want to be all in on it, right? I'd want to know that I'm not wasting my time, that there really is an opportunity to carve out a niche in a market and build a profitable business in doing that.
in your experience with the startup founders that you've worked with, why do you think that they don't approach pitch decks with this mentality? How do startup founders typically think about the pitch deck that prevents them from moving forward and clarifying their own understanding of the business to themselves? What is the blockage? What is the resistance?
I don't think they equate a pitch deck as a tool to help themselves. They only see it as a necessary evil that they have to build in order to get funding, right? So they don't see it as their friend necessarily. And that's why they don't do it until it's time to get funding. All of those benefits that I described, I don't think most founders really think about that. Now, they may some may jot down some kind of business plan, some kind of outline, but I think most don't, right? I think most have an idea and then they stampede towards building an MVP. Quite often don't even validate their assumptions around the problem and the issues with current solutions and the market's desire for a solution like the solution they plan to build. They just build it. It's the old adage of falling in love with the solution and not the problem, right? I got a great idea for a product and I'm going to build it. Then I'll figure out if anybody needs it. Before I figure out if anyone needs it, I'm going to go get some money because I spent all this money building an MVP and now I'm out of money, right? That's typically the flow that I see. And the complete opposite, and I did a LinkedIn post on this, the founder of Coinbase did this, is keep your day job, keep the money coming in. You have a hypothesis for an unmet need, an opportunity within a market where current solutions suck, and you could build something that's 10x better in a way that 10x advantage could actually not only attract customers in the beginning, but you could also protect it so that you don't immediately lose market share to fast followers. You can do all of that in your spare time without quitting your day job. And just getting problem solution fit, which is a prerequisite for product market fit, problem solution fit, you can do that nights and weekends. You don't even have to build a product, right? You can use Canva or some other, you can mock up some, this is what a product might look like. And before you even show them product, you say, here's what I think. I might say to you, Omeed, here's a problem I think you have, but I'm not sure. Confirm to me that in the list of things that keep you awake at night, in your particular role, in your particular department, assuming it's B2B, tell me what's the number one, number two things that keep you awake at night, right? And they keep you awake at night because your job depends on doing these things, but the solutions available to you today to do those things suck. And you really wish there was a better way to solve this problem, because hitting your quarterly goals, getting your bonus, keeping your job, all depend on you solving this problem better than you're able to solve it right now. And so you've got to have those dialogues and find out what actual problem is it that you need to solve. And it may not be the initial one that you think about, but by going through the conversation with your ICP proxy, you refine your assumptions on what the product is. You refine your assumptions on what are the gaps with existing solutions. And then you can say, well, if I was to build this, if this product were available to you and it solved those limitations of current solutions with A, B, and C, and you could switch from your current solution to this product with this relative ease, would that be interesting to you, right? And you can do all of that before you even quit a job. Right. But I think most founders don't do that. They quit, they start building an MVP, and then it's like, oh God, I've got 2-3 years into this. And now I've got to figure out if anybody actually wants it. And what I always say with pitch decks, investors they're looking at startups. They're going to pick 1 out of 100, 1 out of 500, and they're going to pick the one that has the best risk reward profile. right? And, the reward profile obviously is upside on their investment, depending on the size of the fund. Typically, the upside they're looking at is between 1 and 3x the size of the fund. So obviously, bigger funds are looking for companies that can have bigger exits. Smaller funds might be more tolerant of companies that might have smaller exits. But once you've got that upside, what are the risks to a startup being successful? Well, there's only 3 or 4. The first is market risk. There's actually no market for the product that you've built, right? And I think a lot of startups stampede towards building an MVP, and they haven't even validated that there's a market for what they're building.
Yes, a lot of startups probably die in that.
Think of these as hurdles, right? The first hurdle
Yeah.
you've got to clear, there's actually a market for what I'm building. The second hurdle is the product hurdle, right? And that is there's a market for a product like yours, but yours is no better than the existing solution, so you will not get any market share, right? So you didn't build a better product. You just built a Me Too product. The market's good, so now you passed market, you failed on product. If you pass market and you pass product, you've still got to build this thing. You've got to launch it. You've got to get it from 0 to 1 million, and then from 1 million to 5 million, then from 5 million to 50 million. Now you need a team that has all the relevant experience required to build this thing, to launch it, get it from 0 to 1, get it from 1 to 5, get it from 5 to 50, right? And so that's the third hurdle is the product idea is good, the market is there, but your team just doesn't have the experience. Either it lacks the domain experience or the product building experience or the startup building experience to pull this thing off. Or you don't have the right head of sales or the right head of marketing, the right head of customer support to pull this thing off. And that's the third hurdle, right? And so people typically fail on one of those 3 things. And the team one in particular is this is an issue that I see, people need to build an MVP, or they've built an MVP and they've got the first 2 or 3 customers. They got to get from 0 to 1 million or 0 to 5 million. But then they hire somebody from a brand name company that grew revenue from, 500 million to 1 billion, right? They were either the marketing team that did all the demand gen and sales support to make that happen, or it was the sales team. Well, they were very successful at doing something that you don't need. You need the head of marketing, the head of sales, the head of customer support that were successful with a startup that did what you need to do. They built this thing from 0 to 1 million, 1 million to 5 million. And that's usually where the teams fall down, is they're not staffed with people that have already done what needs to be done before.
I think you did a LinkedIn post on that too that I had commented on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. There's about 10 principles that I tend to rotate on.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, a lot of them just seem so obvious, and they are obvious, but people don't do them. Right. And so I'm trying to level up the handful of companies that get funded. They do all these things, and then the others don't, and they're not quite sure why. It's, well, you've got to level up on all of it. You've got to work backwards from what the investor wants, right? They want to invest in a company that has the potential, has the product and team potential to be the market share leader in a large growing market, which means you've got to sell. You've got to convince the investor that you've got a large growing market. You've got to convince the investor that you've got a product that's sufficiently differentiated to be the market share leader. And you've got to convince them that you have a team that can pull this thing off, right? And so all of these things are they're almost like the fundamentals of a pitch, whether it's a verbal pitch or a pitch deck. And all you're doing is working backwards from what the audience that you're presenting to, what are they looking for, right? And I know you've had companies of your own in the past. When we do sales pitches, everything's about WIFM. What's in it for me, right? What's in it for your audience, right? Typically, the bad salespeople, they talk all about the product and not about the customer's problems, right? The bad pitch decks talk all about the product, pay scant attention to the market, usually do a terrible job of sizing the market, don't really talk seriously about the competition, and just do a glancing overview of the team. And yet those are the key levers that investors, are looking for to actually propel a company to a point where they could get a return on their investment.
I think we're right up against my next question for you.
Okay.
I heard you say that you have a process and a philosophy with respect to working with founders on their pitch decks, and that when founders work with you, what they get is this process and this philosophy. I'd love for you to walk us through that.
Yeah, I think I've kind of touched on it. The philosophy is work backwards from what your audience, the investor, wants, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you and I, we had an aunt in Peru that died and left us $1 million, we'd probably invest it in the stock market. Maybe we want to invest it in a mutual fund, get some diversification. And we've got 1 million mutual funds to choose from. We're going to look for the one that gives us the best risk return profile, right?
Right.
Founders are just the same. They've got money to invest. They've got 1 million startups to choose from. So they're looking for the ones that have the best risk return profile. One of the biggest predictors of startup success is a founder or founding team that have already been successful before. And that's why teams with repeat founders are always find it easy to get funded, because they've de-risked the team portion of the 3 risks: market, product, right? So the philosophy is work backwards from what they want. What they want is to invest in you and to build perhaps a 15, 20% stake that they can sell at IPO or through an M&A, literally make the fund, right? Because they know that if they invest in 10, 20, 30 funds, they know that most of them are going to be worth nothing. And so if it's a $200 million fund, they would like each investment to have the potential to have a $2 million exit. They can only get that if you dominate a market, and you can only dominate a market if A, the market exists, and B, the product is differentiated enough to fend off the competition, current and future, and the team can pull it off. So that's the philosophy, right? It's not what you want to say about your company, it's what investors want to hear. So let's work backwards from what they want to hear. And the second part of that philosophy is assume that investors want to say no to you, whether you're verbally pitching or whether they're reading your pitch deck. And one way, the way I like founders to think about the pitch deck is it is a vehicle for proactively answering all the questions that they need answered in order to want to engage with you. So one, proactively answering all obvious investor questions. And they tend to be common to any startup, right? Big market, strong tailwinds, differentiated product, etc. But the second is, it's also got to proactively counter any obvious objections, right? And they tend to be startup specific. Oh, you're in the rideshare market. Well, what about Uber, right? So the checklist is, it answers all the questions investors need answering very clearly, very concisely, in a way that will excite them. And B, you've already thought through all the potential objections, and we also bake that into the deck. And so that's kind of our yardstick for measuring, is it done, right? And one of the reasons founders are on version 58 or 560 of their pitch deck is they don't know when it's done. There's no measure of doneness for a pitch deck. And I would submit the measure of doneness is, to the best of your ability, you've proactively answered all these key questions and you've proactively countered all these objections. Now, when we're done, I'll probably have taken you from a C- to an A-. To get it to an A+, you are going to have to go out. You're going to have to pitch it to investors. You will find that there's a couple of questions that you're not answering, or you're not answering well enough. You'll find that there's maybe an objection that you hadn't thought of that you need to counter. But the point being, most of it should be baked into that first version, and then you can kind of take it from that A- to A+. That's our kind of philosophy, if you like. And then the process is what I alluded to earlier is, okay, let's break down the pitch into the obvious segments that we're all familiar with, right? The problem, the solution, business model, market sizing, the whole 9 yards. What I do, my process is I let them walk me through their current pitch deck, not because I'm going to fix it. It's unfixable usually, but just because I want to start the knowledge transfer, right? The brain dump, so that I understand all of this kind of cauldron of information about the business that I'm going to have to work with. My job is going to be to boil it back down into something very clear and concise that gives investors what they're looking for. And then then I give them about a little questionnaire. There's about 60 questions. 3 or 4 questions again about the market, the product, the competition, the team, et cetera, et cetera. Because again, a pitch deck in many cases just answering there's about 50 obvious investor questions that need to be answered. So they answer those. And then I actually create a straw man of the outline. I say, look, if I were you, here's the one thing I would say about the problem, the solution, the business model, all these things. And then here are the 3 things that I would add to each one of those to support, amplify, and clarify. And that's our outline. And usually when we go through that, it's very different from how they were thinking about it previously. And they love the clarity and they love the brevity, and it just cuts to the chase. And we don't really, we may do a Zoom session or 2 where we just kind of tweak it a little bit, but then it's done. And then I say, okay, now let's turn that into slides. But we've done the hard work. We've put the pitch in your pitch deck. I would argue that most pitch decks are all deck and no pitch, right? There's literally no pitch in these pitch decks. And what they've done is they've just taken a template that they found, all right, or they've taken the YouTube pitch deck or the Airbnb pitch deck, and they've just tried to fill in the blanks. But the problem is, pitch deck templates are great for at least saying, look, here's the logical structure of a pitch. Here's how you should sequence the information. But the problem is, you give somebody like people like, I don't know if you've ever seen that Sequoia pitch deck template, the little green one that's all. So if you look closely, you'll see my name at the bottom of that. That actually never existed from Sequoia. They had a blog post that just described it, and I just turned it into a little PowerPoint and I put it out on SlideShare, and now it's everywhere. So I always laugh when I see that thing. But they're open-ended questions, right? What problem do you solve, and what are the limitations of current solutions? Well, you could take 5 members from the same team, from the same startup, and ask them those questions, and you get 5 different answers, right? And so the science of a pitch deck is, look, sequence the information this way, answer these questions. That's like the science. The art is, well, how do you take the raw material, the information that the startup has, and slot it into answering those questions? How do you actually answer those questions in a way that A, can be supported and validated, but B, it's structured in a way that the investor really wants to hear, right? And sufficient detail with sufficient verification. So, for example, competition is so poorly covered in most pitch decks. And yet, think about it from the investor standpoint. I need this product to absolutely dominate this. I need it to be the Uber of rideshare, or I need it to be the Airbnb of at-home hospitality. And if you can't convince me that not only have you built something that customers are just going to be, you're going to have to pry it out of their cold, dead hand, but you've got some advantages that cannot be easily replicated in any short order, then why would I believe that you will be able to dominate this market? And if you can't dominate this market, you're not going to get the revenue growth, which gets you the exit valuation that gets me the return on investment I'm looking for. So the philosophy is we're answering all of these key questions, and we're also proactively countering all of these objections. The process is brain dump, give me all of it. I'll boil it down. I will distill it into 15 bullets, 16, 14, doesn't really matter, with 3 or 4 bullets underneath each one of those headlines to support, clarify, and amplify. And that is your pitch. So that's my process.
And just like general overview, what are, the primary, 15 bullets that founders should include in their pitch decks, for example?
Well, it's everything that you see in a pitch deck. So I tend to do a cover slide. We all do a cover slide, but the cover slide is like the homepage of a website. Too many founders actually fail on the very first slide, which is the cover slide. It needs to have a headline and a subhead, and it needs to very clearly clarify the product category, the target customer, and the primary use case. And ideally, it needs to hint a little bit at the differentiation. The second slide that I always do is an investment highlights, and it has 6 sections. Give me the highlights for the market, including the size and ideally the growth rate. Give me the product highlights. Give me the team highlights. Give me your traction highlights. Give me a quick idea of how big you think you can be in 3 years, and give me a quick summary of the raise. And essentially, you've summarized the entire pitch deck in 6 bullets. They're not bullets.
Yeah. Wow. That's like early, like right up front.
Well, it's like otherwise, it's like giving somebody a textbook without a table of contents, right? So it serves several purposes. First of all, done right, it gets the investor to lean in. People love to say investors spend 3 minutes on a pitch deck. I think that's bullshit. I think people spend 30 seconds. They glance at the cover slide. Okay, these guys can't even tell me what they do and who they help. I have no idea what the product category is here. I have no idea what the target customer is. And then they go into problem and solution and everything else. And none of those slides make sense because they didn't establish the context of the category and the audience in that first slide. So by the time you've done the cover slide and you've done the highlights, you've actually remember what we're trying to do to get the investor to swipe right, which is a little thing that I like to say, look, your pitch deck is a dating profile. It doesn't need everything in the kitchen sink. It needs just enough information for an investor to swipe right and say, you know what? I'd like to dig in and learn a little bit more about this particular startup. And they're only going to do that for 1 in 50 or 1 in 100. So if you think about it, the cover slide, I know who they are. I know what they do. I got the category. I've got the primary use case. I've got the target audience. I know how big the market is. I've got a couple of things on what makes the product amazing. If we're really lucky, maybe we've got some patents. I've got a couple of things on the team. I already know that the founder is a 3X founder. It's had 2 prior exits in this space. I already know they've got X number of customers and Y revenue or whatever the traction is. I can see that they're going to grow over the next 3 years at a rate that looks exciting to me without being ridiculous. And I can see that what they're raising and how much they're raising and the stage of the raise. And I know that that fits my investment thesis. I know their market fits my investment thesis. I know that their projected growth fits my thesis. I know that their category and audience fits my thesis. And what they're asking for fits our thesis, right? Yes, we invest at that stage. Yes, we write checks of that size. And so you've done all of that in 2 slides. It probably take 20 seconds for somebody to glance at, right? And by the way, I actually take that investment highlights and I throw it at the end, just before the last slide that has the founder's contact information as a recap, right? Because I think most investors, whether they do it on a scratch pad or they do it in their head, they're actually going to score you on those things as they're going through the deck. So you could either let them do it or you could kind of do it for them. Now, of course, they'll take it with a pinch of salt, but you're laying the table, right? You've got an advantage if you say, here's how you should think about us. And here's why we might be a really good investment for you. Investment highlights, I think, buys you the 3, 4, 5 minute deep dive that you wouldn't necessarily get without that. And it's like, well, now when I get into the team, the problem and the solution, I've got all of that context. It all makes sense. But to answer your question, so I do cover, I do highlights. If it's a really strong team, I'll typically do the team slide, especially I tend to be working with early stage startups. They're doing pre-seed or seed. So in many cases, you're really betting on the team. There's not a lot of product traction there to bet on. So you're betting on the team. And so once you've established the context, you need to know, is this team qualified to address this opportunity, right? So I tend to do the team slide, and then I do some kind of typically opportunity, right? If this problem was solved, all these millions of people would benefit from it. And then the problem slide is where we talk about what's currently out there. How are people solving this problem today? And why do those solutions suck? And are these incumbent players, are they fast and nimble, or are they like oil tankers and slow moving and probably unlikely to be able to react if you come into the market with something new and innovative? So then we do the solution, then we do product. So the solution slide is not you specific. It said, what would be the ideal solution to this problem? And then you introduce the product as, well, ta-da, here's a product that is that ideal solution. And I usually do at least 1 or 2 slides for the product. So the first one I do is how does this thing work, right? Broken down into 3 or 4 simple steps. If it's a consumer app, if you take Airbnb, right? It's like browse places to stay, compare ratings and reviews, book and pay, right? Just give a high level view of this thing. And you can do that with B2B too, right? I did one for a company that's basically tokenizing securities. And it's a very complex thing, but we still were able to break it down into 4 simple steps. So the investor, all right, I get a rough idea. I don't know exactly how it works, but now I've got a rough idea of how it works. And then and that's usually it for product. But if the product doesn't exist in a vacuum, which few products do, if it needs to integrate with other existing systems in the customer's ecosystem, right? If it does some back office stuff, but it doesn't do financials, and it needs to plug into an ERP system, or it needs to plug into QuickBooks, then I like to do a second product diagram that just says where we fit. Here's us, and here's our customers' existing solutions, and we plug into all of these things. We pull this data from there, and we push that data over there. Maybe we push over into their data warehouse, their data lake, and so on. So what have we got? We've got cover, we've got highlights, we've got opportunity, problem, solution, product 1, maybe product 2. Now competition. The competition, I like to do a grid. And I like to keep it fairly simple and make it very clear on the slide that there's a very detailed version of this available to you on request. In other words, I know that 99 out of 100 of you aren't going to want to follow up. So I'm not going to give you all the detail. I'm going to give you enough for 1 or 2 people to get interested. And then the detail comes later. And you'll see that I do the same thing with the financials. So usually what I do is I like to do the chart. So down the chart, we've got what are the 3 to 5 biggest must-have requirements in an ideal solution for this target market. And then there's a column for us, there's a column for incumbents, and then there's a column for other startups like us. And then we do a comparison. And typically it's not a binary yes, no, it's more nuanced, right? So I did one for a company that does AI computer vision, and they compete amongst others with Google and Microsoft, right? So we didn't just, so we took accuracy, and they were actually using this. They'd actually won a deal with Walmart because their AI computer vision was just incredibly good at scanning products, right? And as you probably know, the retail industry is dying to master fully automated checkout because retail checkout staff is one of their major expenses. The other application for AI computer vision for these retail folks is being able to see when people pull stuff off a shelf and then don't pay for it. So it's good for theft as well. So our grid for them was the speed of the speed of recognizing the SKU, right? The accuracy of recognizing the SKU, and the total number of SKUs that you can deliver that speed and accuracy for at any point in time. And so that's not yes, no. The speed was less than half a second for us and greater than 1 second for everybody else. The accuracy was 99.9% accuracy for us and 60 to 70% accuracy for everyone else. And for us, the scalability was, I think it was 250,000 SKUs. For those guys, even their crappy speed of recognition, they could only do it up to like 10,000 SKUs. So you do the competition, but you hone in on the if you ever do an RFP, there's always must-haves and nice-to-haves. You try and pick out the 3 or 4 things that are most likely to drive the purchase decision in your favor. And then you have to honestly, in a non-trivial way, compare yourself to incumbents and to other new players in the space. So that's the competition slide. Once we do the competition slide, well, how do we make money? Right? And that's a very simple business model slide. Do you charge? Is it a SaaS fee per user? Is it free software, but you take 0.5% on top of every transaction that's processed through your platform? Whatever it is, there's a business model. It's usually 2 or 3 revenue streams. As soon as you've got the business model, now you can do a proper market slide because you can do a bottom-up sizing. Right? If I know how much my average revenue per customer is, which is provided by the business model slide, all I need to know is how many potential customers are out there in some geographic area, let's say North America, and now I've sized my market, right? If 100% of the people that could buy my product and they pay what my business model says they'll pay, then that's my TAM. And then if I want to take that total number of customers and start to segment it, I can get my SAM and my SOM if I want to. So we do business model, we do market. Now I do go to market. Okay, so I know the problem you solve. I got a good idea of what this product looks like. I've got a good idea of how you're going to differentiate, what your enduring competitive advantages are. I know how you make money. I know how much money you could make if you had 100% market share. Now I need to know, how are you actually going to acquire and retain those first few customers. So really, that's the kind of the go-to-market slide. And we're really talking about three things: customer acquisition and two things: customer acquisition and customer retention. And again, this is where most pitch decks are very superficial. We're going to do some paid search and some paid social, right? You got to get more specific than that. We go to some shows. Well, which shows are you going to go to and why? So it's really the marketing tactics to generate the top of the funnel, right? The top of the pipeline, and then the sales tactics and strategies to empty the funnel and turn the leads generated by marketing into customers. So that's kind of the go to market, right? Then we do the roadmap. How are we going to solidify and extend our product lead? We've already got these advantages that will allow us to dominate this market. Well, how are we going to protect and expand those over time, right? How are we going to make the product even more appealing to customers? And sometimes in the market slide, I'll tell people, a common question is, well, our first opportunity isn't that big, but we think we can grow into this, and that is a big market, and that will be interesting to investors. I say, well, think about your total opportunity over time. It's almost like a wedge or a checkerboard. I'll stick with the wedge. The thin end of the wedge is the first product, first use case, first customer, first segment. You can certainly show the adjacent customer segments and the product expansions, and you can size those out on your market size if you want. You can say, look, here's the size of the opportunity that we think we can work our way into, but we're going to start here because you know that we don't have the time, the resources to do anything other than be the best thing at one thing for one audience, right? But you can cover those other things. So in the roadmap, you're talking about, well, what are you going to do to make sure you continue to dominate the thin end of your wedge, but maybe there's things that allow you to expand into adjacent markets. Maybe you have to do some internationalization of the product, right? We need to support multiple currencies, multiple languages. Maybe you're just going to add more modules, right? You're just going to sell more to the existing customers. So that typically requires building extra functionality. Sometimes on that roadmap, it's not just modules functionality that we're adding, but maybe you want to go after maybe it's a SaaS product and you're targeting larger customers that won't even look at you if you don't have SOC 2 certification. Well, if you don't have that, you better have SOC 2 certification in the next 6 months on your roadmap, right? So the roadmap is really a mechanism to say, in the competition, we already explained why we think we're in a great position to dominate this market, but we're not resting on our laurels. The roadmap says, here's how we're going to strengthen and expand our ability to dominate this market and adjacent markets. Okay? So just to recap, now we've done cover, we've done highlights, we've done team, we've done opportunity, problem, solution, product, business model, competition, go-to-market, roadmap. That's probably about 12, I think. The next one I do is financials. And all I do there is we just project revenue and burn for the next 3 years. And if there's multiple revenue streams, maybe we'll color code the bars for the revenue. And again, there's a little thing that says, if you want to see the detail, just ask. Because we've got a full detailed P&L behind this thing. We've got all our revenue assumptions. We've got all our OpEx assumptions. But don't put that in a deck because nobody will believe it. It needs to be discussed and presented. And in many cases, it's less about the numbers per se, but are they in the right ballpark? And are your revenue assumptions valid and credible? And are your OpEx assumptions valid and credible? For example, is the ratio of sales and marketing spend to product development spend appropriate for your stage? In the beginning, when you're building lots of product, I would expect to see a higher percentage of revenue on product development, less on sales and marketing, and maybe not much on support because you don't have any customers yet. But maybe by year 3, those ratios have changed, right? And you can have that detail when you have a conversation. But I think most investors just want to see, well, where are you going to be in 3 years? If you're going to grow from 50K to 150K in 3 years, I'm not interested, right? You're just not growing fast enough for us. If you go from 500,000 to maybe 1.5 million to maybe 4.5 million, the old triple, double. Well, now that's interesting, right? Now I want to see that detailed P&L to see whether that's actually doable.
Right.
And by the way, what I like to do is when I show those revenue growths, I like to show the percent market share. Remember, we've already sized the market in the market slide. So not only show me that the revenue growth the trajectory is an attractive trajectory. It's not it's a Goldilocks trajectory, it's not too ridiculous, but it's not too uninteresting. But also to get year 1, year 2, year 3 revenue, do you need 20% of the market, or do you need 1% and then 2% and then 3%? Because that also adds credibility, right? You're more likely to be able to get to that number if you require less market share. Financials is just a straightforward 3-year projection with some detail. I usually put the customer count under there as well. And then the last slide is the ask, or the penultimate slide is the ask. And I like to break that out into prior funding and the current raise. So tell me what you've raised before. Tell me who you raised it from. Tell me what you did with it. What did you accomplish with that $800K that you raised from friends and family, right? And then tell me how much you're raising. Tell me the form of the raise. Is it a SAFE? Is it an price to equity round? Tell me how much you're raising. You can tell me how you will spend it if you want to just give me a rough allocation across marketing and sales. But what I really care about is what are you going to achieve with it? You're going to take customers from X to 3X. You're going to take AR revenue from X to 3X. Right? Tell me how you're going to growth of the business you will achieve with this money. And then I finish with the highlights recap, which is a way, again, of framing everything that you've told them. And then the last slide is always a contact slide, and it's literally just a picture of the founder with all their contact information and an invitation to reach out. So that usually ends up being about 15 or 16 slides. When we do the outline, it's 15 or 16 statements. And each one of those has usually between 3 and 4 bullets that support, clarify, and amplify the key takeaway. But if a founder did nothing but read, or if an investor did nothing but read those 15 slide headlines, they should get 80% of the pitch if it's done properly.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was incredible.
It was a lot. I do have a tendency to talk a lot, and
you just walked everyone through an entire pitch deck. So everyone out there is absolutely going to get a ton of value from this podcast.
And you don't even have to remember it. If you go to my website, I've got all that in a Google Doc template for the outline, and a Google Slides template for the deck itself. And everything that I've just said to you is kind of in there. Here, for this slide or this section of your pitch, if you're just doing the outline, these are the obvious questions that you need to be answering. And then I actually provide a sample for this fictitious startup I created years ago, Gleamer, just to, I think you can't just have a template that says, have this slide, right? I say, you need this slide. This is my recommended sequencing of the slides. Change the order if you want, but I don't know why you would. And for each slide, here's the 3, 4, 5 questions that you're answering. So understand the purpose of this slide. And then here's a worked example. So you can look at that and say, okay, I see how that answers those investor questions. My answers are different, but now I can I've got an idea. I've got an example to work from. I need to do that, but for my startup. And that's so much more helpful. Template with nothing else is useless. But if the template provides the questions that each slide needs to answer and then provides a worked example, I think that's a lot more valuable. And I have that for free on the website for anyone that needs and wants it.
Got it. Are there any other resources that founders can look for from you that you have available?
Yeah, there's actually, I pulled together, I never did update it. I wish I had, but there's a list. If you go to the actual resources tab on my website and you drop down, and I think I call it the Pitch Deck Coach Library. And there's just tons of things in there that there's a PDF called Pitch Deck Hacks and the Venture Hack Bible that I don't think tons of founders aren't even aware that this thing exists. So I have links to that. Vinod Khosla has written some great, I've lost you. Let me just find you again. Folks like Vinod Khosla, VCs have written great articles on what they're looking for in a pitch deck. I have those there. I have links to the entire Y Combinator school, right? If I was a founder, wouldn't quit my day job before I even start testing my idea and testing my problem and solution assumptions. I'd probably just spend a month and just crank through, the Y Combinator startup school. It's literally all there, free and readily available. And there's just tons. There's probably about 3 dozen resources that are similar to that folks could just click through and explore and learn from, right? Accelerate their learning. I'm all about how can we accelerate the learning curve for first-time founders in terms of do this, don't do that.
Malcolm, really appreciate all the information you've shared on the show today. For everyone out there, the resources link is going to be in the show notes below. So you will be able to access the resources that Malcolm has to offer on his website by clicking the link below. I also will be hyperlinking Malcolm's LinkedIn page as well, so you can connect with him directly there too. But man, this has been very not just enlightening, but yeah, I learned a lot, and I've been in the space, for quite some time. Have done a lot of pitch decks myself. I've seen a lot of pitch decks. I've seen a lot of pitches. This was incredible. So thank you so much, Malcolm. Really
I'm glad it's
appreciate it.
helpful. There's a lot of approaches. I would never say that mine is the correct approach, but I always back up my recommendations with here's the supporting philosophy. Here's why I think you should do that. And I get a lot of folks come to me and they'll say, we worked with a couple of other people and they would say, do this, but they would never explain why you should do that. And I don't think you should ever tell anybody to do anything without, here's why I think that will benefit you. And here's why I think that will help your pitch deck be that much better. So it is just one man's opinion. I wouldn't claim it's the best way, but it's my way. And if folks want to tap into it, I'd love to share it with them.
Awesome. Yeah. So for everyone out there, make sure you connect with Malcolm. As always, thanks for joining us for another episode of SaaS Buyers Club. If you got anything out of this episode, which there was a lot to get from it, for sure, make sure you subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, leave comments. Tell us what you got from the episode today. We love hearing from people. So thanks so much for joining again this week, and see everyone next week.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.